Welcome back to another episode of the Yellowhammer Sports Podcast. I'm your host, CJ Duncan. We are so glad to have you all back. Thanks for tuning in. We have another familiar face with us this week. We have Michael. Michael, you were former co-host, but now you're just a regular on the show. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your time, man.
Absolutely, man. Always happy to hop on. Appreciate you having me back.
Of course, of course. So how's things going, Michael? Do you want to just kind of update people on where they can find you and what you've been up to recently?
Yeah, nothing new on my end in terms of where to find me. Still churning out Yellowhammer content every day. Obviously, we're really in the best time of year. So, yellowhammernews.com or follow me on Twitter at mbrauner WNSP. That's my radio gig down here in Mobile, my full-time job. You can hear us every morning 6 to 9 on the opening kickoff. If you're not in Mobile, you could use the Sound of Mobile app. So yeah, I mean, same old on my end. Just enjoying the football season.
Well, I'll tell you guys, Michael is truly one of my favorite people to talk football with because he allows me to get in the weeds of things, but also he's always going to bring kind of a historical note to whatever we're talking about as well. And I'm just a football nerd, so I always appreciate having you on and having these conversations with you. But let's jump right in, man. We had a weekend of ball, man. I went into it, thinking I had a great idea, a great grasp of what was going to happen, or at least what I thought was going to happen. But some of it was surprising, and then some of it I feel like I predicted. But let's start with your Crimson Tide. Coming off a bye week, man, as a football nerd, as I said before, like I would have loved to just have been in that offensive game planning room. Just what did they see on tape? Did they say, okay, this is it? This is it. We're gonna switch some things around, really lean into what our players do best, and it's gonna work to perfection. And which is what happened on Saturday. Give me your thoughts on what you saw. I mean, it was just beautifully schemed.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly in terms of the leaning into what their players do best. I mean, I've given, and I think rightfully so, this season a lot of criticism to Jalen Milroe since the Georgia game, and he was great in the Vanderbilt game as well. But he only had the ball for 17 minutes, as you know very well. So since really the Vanderbilt game, I mean, the performances against South Carolina and then of course Tennessee, he just flat out wasn't good. I mean, there's not really another way to say it. Now, I will say, seeing the gear he hit in Baton Rouge on Saturday, I think there's no question that in the best case, he was a little bit dinged up for those couple weeks, and it looked like he got right and got healthy over the course of the bye week. But I think, you look at the Tennessee game, Jalen Milroe threw the ball like 45 times in that game, and you saw firsthand it's just not going to be a recipe for success for the personnel that this offense has, which is a little bit of a shame. You got a stud like Ryan Williams, and at times, believe me, they tried to get him the ball in the Tennessee game because they targeted him, a million times. I think it was literally 18 targets. Obviously you want to get the ball to your best players, but it gets to a point where you can't just spam the same guy. And it's not like Ryan Williams is the only talented wide receiver in the room by any means. So, Jeremy Bernard has been great this season. Obviously, we know what Kobe Prentice can do and Kendrick Law as well. So, this is a team full of weapons. And for a couple weeks there, it kind of looked like, all right, we got a quarterback who's just not going to be able to get him the ball. And that was the case against Tennessee. I mean, Jalen Milroe missed really some easy throws that a basic, even Division III level quarterback has to be able to make. There were plays with clean pockets. A lot of people complained about the Tennessee being offsides on that third down where Milroe got sacked. But if you remember the second down play, Ryan Williams is wide open in an open field, and he skied it 10 feet over his head, and that's from a clean pocket. So obviously there was something wrong with him, but I think more so than any sort of injury situation, I think I think it's a bit mental for him when Alabama starts from behind, and they can't run the kind of offense they want to run. I don't think they could run the kind of offense they want to run because he was a little bit banged up and maybe didn't have that same gear as a runner. But man, I mean, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later after the Missouri game and then the bye week, it was encouraging in the bye week, in the Missouri game specifically from the defense, but you also kind of figured, all right, we went up against a backup quarterback against a Missouri team who, frankly, I haven't really thought is good the entire season. Other than preseason ranking, they haven't given you any reason to think that they're any good. I didn't take a ton out of that from the defense, although it was nice to get a shutout, and I loved that Kane Womack put the starters back out there to secure that shutout. But I think everyone kind of went into the game against LSU thinking these are two really evenly matched teams. Alabama at their best probably beats anyone in the country. We saw that in the first half against Georgia, but they hadn't been at their best for I guess you could say they were in the Missouri game, but even the offense is just still a little bit one-dimensional and lacking the ability to run the ball in the traditional fashion, with a running back between the tackles. And I still think they have that kind of issue, but if you're going to get 185 yards on 12 carries from Jalen Milroe, it doesn't really matter if you can run the ball with a running back or not. So, yeah, I think what you saw is Alabama at their absolute best. And both on offense and on defense, and Alabama, their best is going to be Jalen Milroe throwing less than 20 passes a game. And he was I don't want to even call it a drop from Ryan Williams because it would have been a pretty incredible play. It was just a touch overthrown, and it was in the rain. That drop in the end zone.
Yes.
For Williams, you were that away from a completely perfect game from Jalen Milroe. And really, 18-ish passes, that's the area where this offense needs to kind of live and make their living, because you saw the potential. When Milroe is healthy and they can get him some space and set him up well, there's not a whole lot you can do to stop that running game. It just kind of is what it is. And that Milroe, if you're an opponent, is going to get something on the ground, but obviously you want to limit it to less than what LSU did. And yeah, I think on defense, they're starting to come into their own a little bit. And you see Kane Womack's scheme starting to take hold, and guys are getting more comfortable. So, I certainly wouldn't want to be an opponent of Alabama right now with the stride they seem to be hitting.
No, I agree with you. And I think from my perspective, when I'm looking at this game, it just shows me how special the offensive minds are on the coaching staff. This coaching staff came from a situation that looked completely different than what we're seeing right now from Alabama, right? When they were at Washington, it was an air raid. You're seeing 200, 300-yard games from the quarterback, that being Penix. And now for them to evolve, right? Evolve their way of thinking and to really specialize basically in the run game, knowing that is the strength of their best player, and probably the best player on every field that he plays on. And maybe I say best athlete on the field every time Alabama touches the field, that being Jalen Milroe, for them to basically say, okay, look, this part, what we know, what we're known for, this may not be best for this team. Each year, each quarterback's going to be a little different. How can we still be successful in doing that? And over the break, they were able to find a way to get those offensive linemen playing downhill. They were able to change I saw where there was different personnel groupings than they usually play with. You saw more RPOs, you saw more motions, you even saw reverse to Ryan Williams. You saw a lot of things to kind of mix things up, have the defense playing on their heels. And I give a big kudos to that offensive staff, just, basically going back to the drawing board and saying, hey, we can be effective in more than one way. We don't have to be just a passing team or a passing minded group. Let's find other ways to be successful. And, Bama outrushed LSU 311 to 104. That is somebody that you're just taking behind the shed and saying, hey, we came to your home turf and beat your butt. And there's no better way to win a game than just complete dominance. That is just putting your hands on somebody else and being very violent. I remember texting Paul and also Grayson saying, hey, as soon as it started raining, I said, this is Bama's game. This is it. LSU is not the LSU of old, right? When you had Les Miles and they would just throw the ball back to the running back in the power eye and get downhill. This is not that team. Nussmeier and those receivers are who they really focus on. That's their bread and butter. And it's raining. And now you got a powerful, confident Alabama team coming in, running the ball. this is going to play toward their favor for sure. So, and then you saw turnovers. Turnovers in the SEC are going to kill you every time. You know, Nussmeier trying to scramble, fumbles the ball, then he has two other interceptions throughout the game in key situations. I think Alabama's linebackers played exceptionally well. We've known that that's probably the best group on defense that they have. But it was good to see kind of Bama evolve. They stopped putting Jalen in those situations where he's just dropping straight back and throwing 25 to 30 times a game. That is not who he is. That's not what this team is. And for them to get that break and understand, all right, if we want to reach our full potential, if we want to max out exactly what this team is capable of, we've got to change. And to me, that is the best form of coaching. That's just from my point of view. I think they did an excellent job.
It's funny because issue-wise, going into the game at least, they were kind of similar, LSU and Alabama. LSU's asking Nussmeier to really throw the ball again, 45.
Sling it.
Because they can't run the ball either.
Yeah.
You know what's? They have two of the best tackles in the country.
Mm-hmm.
You know, including a guy in Will Campbell who's going to be a top 5 or 10 pick. It miffs me that LSU can't run the ball this season, but they really cannot run the ball this season. And then of course the non-equalizer there is the fact that Alabama struggled to run the ball too, but they also have Jalen Milroe to be able to get it going for him. So yeah, I mean, I went to the game. My fiance and I decided last second from Mobile to buy tickets and drive over to Baton Rouge. And you're right, it was raining early and often, and seeing the way that stadium cleared out. And the rain was awesome given that, you know, the way the game was going. If I were an LSU fan, I might have cleared out too. It's no fun getting your butt beat in the rain for sure. But I mean, I think it's a great point saying once it started raining, it's like, all right, Alabama, if they can figure out how to look the way they looked in the first half against Georgia and get that Milroe running game going again, it's going to be really hard for LSU to hang in this thing, and that's the way it played out.
Yeah. And, you know, Michael, at what point do we start to question Brian Kelly? Brian Kelly in the big games. You know, he gets to the podium every week and it's always somebody else's fault, you know, whether he's at LSU or he's at Notre Dame or wherever, you know, there doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of accountability for somebody who has just struggled winning the big game. What are your thoughts on Brian Kelly at LSU?
Yeah, it doesn't help that he's the world's most unlikable guy. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to some LSU fans sitting next to me before the game because I was wondering the same thing. Like, what's the temperature on Brian Kelly and the fan base? The guy to my left, this is, mind you, 30 minutes before the game started. He's like, we hate. We're tired. And, you know, I think there's always a tendency to say like, oh, like, you can't lose a game like that where you got to fire. They're not going to fire him. It's not going to be anything like that. And I think in general, you saw it with Florida and Billy Napier with the revenue share era that we're entering into. A lot of these programs are going to be more hesitant to say, oh, you know, let's just pay him $50-60 million to go away. I think you're going to see a lot more coaches last maybe longer than they would have 5 years ago. And that's just, and I'm not advocating for Brian Kelly to be fired. I think he's one of the 10 best coaches in the country, but you're right. I mean, granted, this was their second home loss in 3 years for Brian Kelly. So the reaction, I think, was a bit much, but you're not wrong in saying, he comes to the podium and he was complaining to the refs about Alabama still rushing 7 when the game is over.
Well, take your starting quarterback out of the game. Take him out of the game if you don't want us to blitz. Like, what are you saying?
Like I said, he's just the world's most unlikable guy. If you remember the display after the USC game in week 1, we're sitting here again and he's pounding the table. He's just, I mean, we knew when he took the job in the video dancing with the recruit, he's going to be a goofy guy. And if he's not your coach, you're going to hate him. But I mean, if you're going to be that kind of guy, you got to win. And it's not like they're terrible by any means, but I think they probably overachieved in year 1. Winning the SEC West when they beat Alabama 2 years ago on that 2-point conversion. I was at that game too, so this one went a little bit differently than that one did. I think when you overachieve in year 1, obviously you want to win and you want to play in SEC championships. That's why you take the job from Notre Dame to LSU. But it almost like he did himself a disservice by, okay, this is how it's going to be every year. Now in divisionless football too, it's as hard. I say all this, they could still make the SEC championship in this wacky tiebreaker scenario, but I mean, it seems unlikely. It's a tough spot he's in. I mean, they're still recruiting well, and really they're hanging their entire hat on Bryce Underwood coming in and being a generational guy. It's funny, I said during the game, it's kind of like the exact same game that played out in Tuscaloosa last year, except Jaden Daniels wasn't there
Yeah,
to
right.
keep it
To
close.
cover up a lot of the flaws of the team.
And 10 of 13 on third down for Alabama for a team that's been terrible on
Hmm.
third down. Even like anything longer, I think I heard a stat when it was 3rd and 4 or less, they're top 5 in the country, something like that. But 3rd and 7 or more, they're in like the 130s. Terrible on third down for the season this Alabama team has been. And suddenly Milroe's just hitting the running back in the flat, running for a first down, finding Kendrick Law on third down. I mean, you can't give up 10 of 13 on third down. You saw it in the Alabama game against Vanderbilt. You can't give up 85% on third down and expect to win the ball game.
Yeah, there's just something missing with LSU. I've been a SEC fan my whole life, and I have seen LSU be historically great on the defensive side of the ball. They have sent so many guys to the NFL, a lot of guys that we know and love, whether it's Tyrann Mathieu, Patrick Peterson, the list goes on. They were known as DBU for the longest time. I think folks like Florida and Ohio State, would like to argue that, but there's just something off. They don't have that same kind of grit and passion, and I don't know, that swagger about them that they've had in the past, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, of course, they send a receiver to the league first round every year, but I think at some point they've got to get back to that old LSU, where the defense kind of leads the program and then everybody else kind of falls into place. But it was interesting to see, and I agree. I think Underwood is the guy that they're hoping to come and save the whole program. And I saw recently that Michigan offered him 10 and change to come there.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to go to Michigan, but
When you
this guy
grow up,
is.
when you grow up 2 hours from Michigan and they gotta offer you $10 million to go there, it says pretty loud and clear that he doesn't want to go
Because
to
he
there.
doesn't want to go there. Right, exactly. So I don't think that's likely. But I mean, for them to feel like they need to put out an offer or they can put out an offer, maybe he has wandering eyes. Maybe he has seen what's going on down there at LSU. Uh, we'll never know the inside scoop on that. But I think LSU is going in an interesting direction, and I think things need to change quicker. Um, or rather sooner than later. So, but I went into last weekend saying, all right, for Georgia against this Ole Miss ball club, you know, if they lose, I don't think it's going to kill them. And if they win, to me, it doesn't change anyone's opinion on Georgia. For Ole Miss, this is their season. They've got to win this game or it's over. You can go ahead and pack this season up and start recruiting for next. Little did I know that when the college football playoff rankings come out, this game was a bigger deal for Georgia than I would have thought. I mean, Georgia basically falling out of the college football playoff after this game against Ole Miss. Michael, what are we thinking right now after watching this game?
Yeah, I mean, I think college football playoff rankings wise, everything will work itself out, assuming Georgia beats Tennessee this weekend, which I think they will.
Right, a
Georgia,
lot of big games left still. A
yeah.
lot of big games,
I
yeah.
mean, I think if you're 10-2 in the SEC, with the exception of Missouri, you're going to be in the college football playoff, and people aren't going to want to hear that when an 11-1 Indiana or a 12-0 BYU that loses the Big 12 championship gets left out. But that's just going to be reality. I mean, we kind of saw it last year. Alabama was sitting at 8, going into the SEC championship, and it was like, oh, what's going to happen? Alabama not going to be able to make the playoff even if they beat Georgia. Okay, they went 11-1. They went undefeated in the SEC and won the SEC championship. There was no world where that team was not going to be in the college football playoff. It was just never going to happen. So, looking at the rankings now, yeah, it looks goofy seeing Penn State and Indiana. I'm pretty anti Big Ten in general, but it looks goofy with the way it is now, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to work itself out. Ultimately, I think Tennessee probably needs to do better than 10-2 because they have the opportunity against Georgia this weekend. But I think you're going to have the winner of Texas and Texas A&M, assuming they both enter with 2 or less losses. You're going to have a 10-2 SEC championship loser that finishes 10-3. You're going to have the SEC champion. So there's a path to get 5 teams. I'm not really ultra concerned about the way the rankings are shaking out for the SEC because I do think it'll ultimately work itself out.
Yeah. I definitely see a path for at least four. I just think it's interesting that someone like Georgia, I get the what the records and stuff may be, but someone like Georgia who lost to Alabama in a close fight, you're one Ryan Williams play away from winning that ball game on the road, and then you lose to Ole Miss on a road in a very hostile environment with a lot on the line, coming off of an emotional game like Florida's, one of their rivals. So for the committee to believe that okay, they're the 12th best team in the country and those are their two losses, it just to me it's a little sketchy. Like you said, things are going to play out because there's a lot of big games. When you roll the ball out, it'll take care of everything. Winning solves all. But I just think it's kind of weird how the committee came up with 12 for a team like Georgia.
Of course, they don't actually believe that Georgia's the 12th best team in the country. I mean, they've had granted, I will say about Georgia, they've been, I don't want to say bad. I mean, you got a road win against Texas. You almost beat Alabama on the road in that comeback. But by their standards, yeah, they've been bad. I was pretty confident Ole Miss was going to win that game this weekend, straight up because Ole Miss has been the better team this year. I mean, the loss to Kentucky at home is inexcusable. It's not you just can't lose that game. But I don't think if they go 10-2, it's going to keep them out of the playoff. I mean, Ole Miss, I think, is one of the 5 best teams in the country. Alabama, I think, is one of the 5 best teams in the country. And then Texas is probably one of the 5 best teams in the country. Georgia had to go on the road to all 3 of them. I mean, they really made up for years and years of weak SEC East scheduling. No offense to the Commodores.
Yeah.
They really made up for it all in one year.
Hey, listen, I've got 2 wins against Georgia in my career. And one being homecoming, so we'll take it.
So no ill will towards Georgia for you. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that was not a game I expected Alabama to lose, but well, again, like you said, winning solves all. So I think 10-2 probably gets it done.
Yeah, no, sure. Well, let's jump into the game a little bit. I looked at it and I said, if there was a game ball, I think that game ball should probably be split between 2 people, right? You've got Jackson Dart, who, I mean, just a warrior in that game, gets hurt pretty early, had a pretty brutal ankle situation going there. You could see him just gutting it out. He wasn't right all night, but the other half of that game ball should go to Austin Simmons.
Mm.
I don't think people realize how big of a spot that was. While Dart is in the locker room, right? Georgia, so after Dart's turnover, Georgia goes down and scores 7-0. Okay, whoa, we got to regroup. On the sidelines, we're thinking we got to regroup. This is a Georgia team that we can't get too far behind on because they've got 2 strong backs and a bunch of tight ends that are going to run this clock. We can't be down 14-0. We've got to recover right here on this drive. And for that kid to come in right there in that moment, and he wasn't just handing the ball off. He wasn't just dinking and dunking. He's making throws. He's throwing darts out there for him to lead them down, to tie that ball game back up, to service while Dart is trying to get taped up and get back ready. They owe him a lot for that because if Georgia goes up 14-0 with all that momentum and that stadium's quiet, you've sucked out all the air of that stadium, that game's over. I'm telling you right now, 14-0 is a lot different than 7-7 with an injured quarterback.
Yeah, that one throw he layered over to, I don't know if you've seen the all-22 angle of it. I mean, to come in that spot as someone who hasn't played any meaningful snaps really, and have the, frankly, the balls to make that throw is just he was incredible. I thought the game was over when Dart threw a pick and got hurt on the first drive of the game. So
a lot of people thought that.
Yeah, credit to Austin Simmons. I mean, I was driving to Baton Rouge and fiance was in the passenger seat with the game on. She was like, who's this guy that's coming? I like him. They should keep him in because he's just coming in out of nowhere. Left-handed quarterback, just zipping the ball around. Doop, doop, doop. And it was cool to see.
And with the playoff hopes on the line too, right? I mean, you got the conditions. I think it's raining out there too as well a little bit, and you're playing, big bad Georgia. I just think it was such a big moment for them and their program. And now you see a really clear path for them to be in the playoff. Like you said, probably a top five. People are looking at them as a top five, organization now. So kudos to that kid for jumping in there in that moment and just playing extremely well. I mean, that he is the definition of stay ready so you don't have to get ready. He is that guy right now, and I'm sure that Lane reiterated to him how well he thought he played. But I kept asking myself during that game, okay, you've got a guy who basically is he's just a sitting duck back there in the backfield. Why aren't y'all pressuring him more? Like,
Mm.
where are the creative blitzes and creative calls to put more pressure on Dart? It felt like it was pretty just base defense for Georgia for the majority of the game. I mean, you see things here and there on third downs, but I mean, the kid was playing 7-on-7 back there.
Yeah.
Like, not he's not mobile at all, or at least not what he's accustomed to. And he's just boom, 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 and your best receivers out. I mean, of course, you've got a slew of receivers there, including Juice Wells, who transferred from South Carolina, who I think should get more touches. But man, what was Georgia thinking on defense, knowing you've got a quarterback with a bum ankle back there?
Yeah, I don't know if you're trying to avoid getting beat. You brought up Trey Harris. I mean, when he was out, it was like, geez, I don't know what the path is here. But it turns out, yeah, Juice Wells and Jordan Watkins are really good players too.
They're really good football players, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to your point, Dart was clearly hampered. I don't know if Kirby saw something on tape that he feels like, all right, we're just gonna get killed if he pressure. But it would have been nice to see, them try it. And I don't know. Georgia has not been the Georgia of old this year by any means.
Yeah. Well, Dart, I give a lot of credit to him. I mean, that team feeds off of his kind of swag and his energy, and I understand why, you put him back in that game. It was just a really gutsy performance. I mean, he a couple times he broke the pocket, started running with it, he laid his shoulder down on a Georgia corner. That's type of stuff matters. The sideline is watching that. And I think that Ole Miss fed off of his energy, his will to win, and that kind of just the stadium was feeding off of it. It was just a perfect storm for Ole Miss, and I think they're going to continue to roll.
Did you
With
ever play there in your career?
I did. So when I was playing, so of course we were in the East Division. This is when we still had divisions, and Ole Miss was so. If you are in the East or the West, you would have two games on the other side of the conference, and one would be a steady matchup, a matchup you have every year, and then the other would be a rotating game. Ole Miss was our like one matchup that we had every year. So my freshman year we played them in Nashville, and it was an incredible game, probably the most packed out game we've had in Nashville. Probably since they probably beat it this year, with all the craze of Vanderbilt football now, but there hadn't been a game as packed out as Ole Miss. And then we would, of course, go back and forth. We even played them in Titan Stadium one year because it was such a popular game for fans in that area, that region of the country. Because what most people don't know is you've got Nashville and you've got Oxford, but there's so many connections between those two in Memphis. And Memphis is such a big recruiting hub that really there's a lot of guys that grew up together or have family members or whatever that are playing on both teams. And so it just became this big thing for us to play Ole Miss.
Yeah, I went to the game 2 years ago when Alabama played them on the road, and it was actually the week after the LSU game. And I had already bought tickets for both after we lost to LSU. I didn't even want to go because it's the second loss and the season's effectively over. But of course, we went, and I was so glad I did. It's such a special stadium to watch. It's a little stadium. There's maybe
Mhm.
60,000 people there, but it's just an awesome place to watch a football game, and the crowd was certainly a key factor in them winning the ball game on Saturday.
Sure, sure. Well, before we get out of here, it's a bit of a slow weekend, I would say, for college football. I'm pretty sure everybody's eyes are going to be on the Georgia-Tennessee game. Do you have any predictions for that game? What do you think Tennessee needs to do to win this game? What do you think Georgia needs to do to win this game? I've been very critical of Carson Beck in the past. I actually thought he didn't play that bad against Ole Miss. thought he played probably one of his better games in the last 5 or 6 games. What are your thoughts on this game this weekend? It feels like it has a lot of playoff implications on there.
Yeah, cupcake week for
Yeah,
Alabama and Auburn. So keep an eye, by the way, on the Texas going to Arkansas. Arkansas hates Texas. That's going
yeah,
to be a rough environment that they're walking into. So, I mean, the line is only about 2 touchdowns. I'd be curious to see if Arkansas can keep it close. But yeah, for Tennessee, obviously a lot of the story is revolving around Nico Iamaleava. Still working on that
aren't
pronunciation.
we all?
Yeah. So Nico, we'll say, he had a concussion last week, and it feels like no one knows if he's going to play or not. For me, it doesn't change it a whole lot. For as good as Nico is supposed to be this year, he really hasn't been all that impressive throwing the ball.
Agreed.
And I still think, I think there's always a tendency to, dismiss a guy early. I think he's still going to be a really good player, but the Alabama game's a perfect example. I mean, that thing could have gotten out of hand if Nico could
He
have,
missed about 4 throws that should have been touchdowns.
yeah, if he could have hit the broadside of a barn. Granted, he did drop a dime right at the end of the game that ultimately won it. But yeah, it doesn't change much for me if because they want to run the ball, and they're going to run the ball with some success. And how does Georgia respond? Ultimately, I just think it's still Georgia. They're still at home. They're coming off a loss. I don't really see much of a path to victory here for Tennessee, unless they gash Georgia for 250 yards on the ground, which they're capable of doing for sure. But it's not going to be with Nico or whoever's arm. If they do it, they're going to have to be able to run the ball and quiet that crowd early. That's how you quiet. You saw it in Baton Rouge. How do you quiet a raucous environment? You run the ball with some success. So Tennessee can do that. Maybe they keep it close for a little while. I'd really like to see that game from Carson Beck because, I mean, frankly, what he was billed up as in the beginning of the season, the guy can't stop throwing it to the other team. It's
Turnovers are
yeah.
just getting out of hand.
So it's not that complicated. What's wrong with him? He just can't stop throwing it to the other team. So I'd like to see a good performance from Carson Beck, and ultimately, I think Georgia wins by 2 or 3 touchdowns.
Yep, and the last time we saw Georgia come off a loss, they went and played Texas. So maybe a little bit of the same coming to Sanford Stadium this weekend. But Michael, as we close out here, I'm looking at the college football playoff rankings. You've got folks like Penn State who I don't think any of us really trust. I mean, they're there because of their record, but I mean, you got Penn State, Indiana, BYU, Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a terrible loss earlier in the year, and with a quarterback who can't really throw the ball in Riley Leonard. So in Miami, been playing with fire all year and finally
Business
lost.
still being there. I mean,
Yeah, so it's really 4 through 11. I mean, come on, guys. You know what I mean? Like you said, I do feel like it's all going to play itself out. A lot of these teams really shouldn't be there if we're talking about eye test, but their record is what their record is, and that's what we got right now. And so, everybody continue to stay tuned. This thing is gonna change quite a bit in the next couple of weeks, and so we thank y'all for joining us again. Michael, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time, and we'll be back here next week talking more football and SEC. Thank you.
thanks for having me, CJ.
Mhm.